Hey folks, welcome back to Dichotomy Deconstructed. This week I'm going to talk about Rimshot and how it was put together. Rimshot is without a doubt the most techno of any of the tracks on Isolated, and a big part of that is because it's really percussive based. In fact, it's called Rimshot because it was created entirely, or not entirely, but like pretty much all the percussion minus a few things here or there. It all came from this piccolo snare, and a lot of it was playing the rims. Actually, let's disengage the snares. So there's a lot of tonal options, and then you engage the snares. It sounds more traditional like a snare drum, but you can do a lot with that. And the other crucial part of Rimshot is I played a lot of the various percussive elements with all these different kinds of mallets. So I've got these like broomsticks, which are a little bit swishier. They have a lot of noise in them, which is nice. And you can see, like, because these split apart like that, that's a lot of interesting percussive and transient variability. A regular snare drum, or a regular drumstick, wood. This is a Matt Halpern Ghost Hammer ProMark Periphery. Hello. This is a regular brush. And then there's just a soft mallet. And all these things hitting the snare are gonna all create different kinds of just drum sounds entirely, and then you can process them and turn them into all sorts of things. So for instance, like this was really good for making like low subby toms, whereas this stuff is more shakery, and this is more traditional. You will hear there are parts in this where there's actually like actual snare fills. So that all being said, let's dive into how this is put together. So this is the Pro Tools session for Rimshot, and you can see that basically all of this stuff right here, all of that, that's all percussion. And that takes up, I want to say, more than half the track, actually. Yeah, you can see actually the melodic and not percussive elements are pretty sparse in general, because this really is a percussive techno track. So let's start and let's go through what's going on in the percussion first. And the first thing you will see are kick drums, and there are two kick drums layered together. This just in the beginning, this is just a high-passed version of the kick for the intro, or actually probably low-passed. Yeah, this is low-passed. And that is ultimately going to be fading in with the track. There is some kind of volume automation. Yeah, so you can see it starts to fade in with everything going on. And that kick just slowly fades until about, the section right before the first snare hit happens. And that's where, it's really just building intensity. So for instance, actually, if you saw me DJ anytime in the last 3 years, it's highly likely that I actually opened up a DJ set with this track. This really was my opener for quite a while. So with the kick in full blast. So it's just pushing like this low end thump the whole time, but it's not a clearly defined kick drum. And if we look at the EQ, you can see it's pretty rolled off. There isn't a lot of high end. I have it, there is a high cut at 900 Hertz. So, I'm really taking all the click. It's really just, So once we get to the actual kick drum though, the one that's really gonna drive the track, there are two kicks. And one of them is this. And I'm guessing this was made on a modular. I can't be totally sure because it just says kickbus.cm, which means it was rendered down in Pro Tools. But just knowing me, it probably was. And then the other is this machine drum kick underneath it. And you can hear there's a lot of sub in there, but there's an EQ that is actually taking out the high end. And it's really not doing anything to the low end, but it's there. So without the EQ. So that's what the EQ is doing. And layered together, they really fill out the kick. And if you take out that machine drum kick, the kick actually sounds a little bit weaker because the machine drum kick's just adding kind of like more of a low mid punch to it. With it, just fattens it up just a little bit. And then I'm using a FabFilter Pro MB, And this is just to kind of control the low mid range. And it's touching the low end just a little bit, but it's just tightening up that low mid area. Without it. But it's a slight difference. I mean, it's only doing maybe 1 dB of gain reduction. It's pretty mild. But that's it for the kick. That's what's going to be running through the whole thing. And then you'll see that there are, you know, like little like affected versions of the kick. It's just a high-passed version, and I use that in a little transition section. So that's it. But really where this gets fun is all the rim shots themselves and all the snare hits. So the first one, which is kind of a hook of this track, is this. And that really is, you know, that's the driving hook of Rimshot, is this da-da-da, da-da-da. And let's take a look. If we zoom in real close, it's very stereo sounding, but it's also, you can tell it's not double tracked. It's the same track, but it is stereo. And the reason why, and this is definitely not traditional by any means, but when I mic'd the snare, I actually mic'd both sides of the snare itself. So whenever I hit with the left hand, that was going to get, you know, that would get carried over to the left, or the left side. The right would be the right. So I think when I did this, I probably just went like dot 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 with like both or something like that, or maybe not. I mean, I probably just did it with one. But you're hearing, you know, different resonances and harmonics coming off each side of the snare. So that is really the trick to what's creating this sound and also creating the stereo width, which it's kind of, you know, silly. Why would you stereo mic a snare drum? Because I'm me. That's why. Not to be pompous. It's just it's just something I do things like that. So and then processing wise, there's a Slate virtual mix rack on here, and I'm just really treating it like an SSL. I mean, there is a 1073 EQ, but I'm just using it as a gain trim, really. I'm just boosting the gain into the SSL stuff. And when I tracked this, I did, in fact, I mean, I have a pair of Neve 70s, or they're Heritage Neve 1073s, but they're fantastic. So I tracked all the percussion through that stuff, and then I'm using this SSL modeled modules, yes, within the Slate mix rack. So I'm doing a little bit of EQing, just kind of like boosting the high mids a little bit, taking out a touch of the lows, and then there's some like kind of like classical or classic SSL compression. So you can see it's hitting about 6 dB gain reduction. Without it, it sounds like this. With. Just makes it slightly punchier. And there's an EQ after, and that's just taking off a little bit more of the low end and just shaping it ever so slightly. That's it. And then all of the percussion, it's all going to go to I called it a rim reverb. It sounds like this with the reverb. And the reverb itself is this 2C Audio Breeze, just like a simple light digital reverb. Sounds good. And there was also an EQ before the reverb. So I don't want to send, it's cutting out, like for instance, like this low end stuff and some of the highs. So I don't know how much you will hear it in this context because that track is already pretty EQ'd, but without the reverb or the EQ on the reverb, it sounds like this. With it. So actually that's a really stark difference. You know, you're not getting any of like that high end fizz. So the fizz is gone. And that's how that one is. There are other little rim shots, like for instance, this guy. And these were probably hit with the stick, I mean, because the transient's pretty sharp. But then let's go to the next ones. And these are kind of, these are gonna be driving throughout the whole track. It's just this like shuffled 16th note little pattern. And this you can definitely tell. I can just hear it that it's like left and right hand. But since, you know, stereo mic, it's all gonna come in the center, but like kind of like the high end harmonics are gonna be on the sides. And these, I don't know if these were done with a stick or probably, because I mean, it's still kind of sharp, but you can see like there is more of an attack or like there's a bit of a fade. It's a softer attack on the snare. So it actually could have been the brush now that I think about it. But that gets filled out with this other little fill right here. And that's just another way of hitting the snare. And as you can see, it was just like a lot of variations of like hitting the snare in different ways and then kind of creating, I mean, I played it, I played different takes to kind of, hawk it in and out with each other. But so it's almost like a call and response kind of technique. But if we go further along, then we get these different rim shots, for instance, like light rim. And this is more of like a shakery kind of thing. Almost shakery, but it kind of fills that motion. And this is when there really is a call and response with another section that's going to hit on the beat 4. And what's nice about this is there's a slight variation between the two. And also you can see it's also just like the dynamics of how it was played. Light rim was played a little bit lighter than the second light rim. You can see that this was hit slightly harder. But there's also an EQ shift. So on this first, we have this DMG audio equilibrium, and it's taking out all the low end and a little bit of the low mid-range. And then that's going once again into a similar SSL chain. However, on this one, we have that same initial equilibrium, but the EQ settings on this are slightly different. So for instance, if we look at this, that's what? Wait. Oh, you know what? That's actually largely identical. So forgive me, no, these are actually identical channels. But I guess it's just the playing that gives it the slight variation. And then there's some more, and this is called rim shaker. And almost without certainty, like that's this hitting the snare, because it's got that kind of like mushy quality to it. This thing's rad, by the way. Like if you have a drum set and you don't have something like that, you should get one because it's super fun. But so that's kind of functioning as a shaker as well. And when you put that shaker with the other stuff, it just keeps that forward momentum going the whole time. So here are our resonant rims with everything as of this point. Add the kick back in. So it almost feels like it's a real like percussive onslaught in a way. It's a lot of stuff going in. There isn't a lot of space. It's really just constant swan 16th notes. But anyway, moving on, and that's mainly it for the main percussive rim sections. But then there are like little affected versions. For instance, like this is just a printed reverb, probably on some rims. So I like doing little things like that because as opposed to using an effect, it's really nice to use the same source material because that sounds really cohesive. So that's the reason I do that. And I mean, in a lot of my work, you'll see me doing these like reverb swells, and it's all printed directly into audio because as you can see, I'm not a big MIDI person. I really like audio always because it's more precise to me and I can have exact control over everything. So all my percussion, always all audio. And then let's talk about the snare rolls, because these are fun. And let's just go to the one in the bridge right before the break. So I'm just going to play, let's say, the last 4 bars of this section. Okay. So here we go, and there is some volume automation on this, but this was just totally played, and this would be the drumsticks. And And at the end, you get a variation to the fill. And then you can hear it's cut super hard. There is no ringing out of that snare. I just cut it. So what's going on here? Again, I'm using my SSL chain. Obviously, the EQ settings are a bit different. The compression isn't super extreme. And then just to catch any peaks, I'm using the newfangled audio saturate just to clip the whole signal. And I'm also bringing up the gain by 2 dB, but it's really just, it's acting as a clipper. And this plugin is amazing. So if you like clippers and saturation, you should look at the newfangled audio saturate. And we also finally get some like upbeat shakers. And one is made from the snare. And that was totally this thing, once again, because it has that nice soft attack. But then I layered a synthetic, this is from that's a Hertz donut. So that's a module. And that obviously sounds very electronic, but you layer them together. And now the hat's nice and wide by also being really sharp. And then there's this to kind of function as an open hi-hat. But what that actually is, it's just a reverb that was originally on this. So what I would have done in this occasion, I'm obviously not going to do exactly the same because I'm not sure. Oh, I guess it was 2C audio something. But I would just take, let's say, ether, because that's probably what it was. And this is a reverb plugin. And I just would have printed, just like taking a setting like this. Something maybe shorter. And I would have printed that directly in there. And obviously it's not going to be identical, but when you layer them together. So that's a way I often make open hi-hats. So as opposed to having a different sample or alternating that sample with something else, like if you're playing a real drum set, obviously you're not going to hear both an open and a closed hi-hat at the same time. I just added a reverb to it, and I used the reverb to kind of create the feeling of an open hi-hat. And that's a nifty little trick. I like to do that a lot. And going further down, this is more of the stuff I was talking about before, where, for instance, these are all like printed reverbs. But it's all affected versions of that same noise hi-hat. And it just creates basically this wash that as we're leading up into, what is a drop, if you will, it creates this cacophony so that when you do hit the drop, then all the noise is gone and you get all the low end back, and it makes that drop really effective. And then once that happens, aside from that blast of noise that happens on the 2 right on that clap, there's really not a lot of actual high end, or not the same amount. I mean, now it's you got like the shuffly percussion, but it's not like a really like high pitched because I want to save that for later. So it's just like it's dynamics, but it's also like frequency dynamics, where if you have everything being really more like murky and low focus, when you finally do add some real high end, it's going to make that transition and the effect of that high end suddenly like really push the energy of a track. So that is the reason why that happens. And there's the snare, and that's just hitting the snare. But and it's very small. It's not a big snare at all. It gets layered with this clap. And here's the clap separately. And I just recorded it here in this room. Very simple. It's not like the best sounding snare ever, but I wanted it to sound organic and real, and there's a slight alternation. Really, though, it's not like 2 different takes. It's just that the stereo channels are flipped on these alternating claps. So it was just cheating, really. But when you layer that with the kick, because they're not massive, they really do just nice, they fill in that, the function of a clap or a snare without being overbearing. Simple as that. Let's go further down. Once again, we have these little hits right here. And that came from a Rimshot. As to how it eventually became that off the top of my head, I'm not totally sure. But that's a cool sound. I mean, the best I can guess, it was, you know, a lower hit or something, or like a rim shot that was then pitched down, put a reverb on it, and you get this roar. But that happens periodically. It's like, for instance, this little drop section. It's a cool sound. Right? That's super fun. And then there's some other, like this is just rim noise. Nothing crazy there. And then these are our hats, our snare shaker, our noise hat. It's a lot of percussion. It's kind of easy to get lost. That's our clap. And this must just be some other little fill that happens periodically, say every, 16 bars or something like that. Yeah, it's just that same kind of thing, just to emphasize, you know, that transitional moment at the end of, I guess it's every 16 bars. So ML falsetto, I don't even want to know what that is, because that definitely didn't end up in the track, and that probably sounds like a dying cat. So let's get rid of that. Here we have some more moments. These are just kind of, you know, effects. They're just textural things. And this is obvious. This is some kind of hit with a bunch of reverb. That's Valhalla in nearly default settings. I just wanted it to just have that quick effect right there, and then I have a reverb or an EQ after it just to take the low end out of that reverb. And then this thing is just a granular wash of stuff. I probably made it in Reactor or something, but there is some panning automation, and that happens from this stereo width plugin, because that would be what it normally sounds like, but with the automation. Another thing to note is that that granular warble, garble, grumble, whatever you want to call it, that gets cut when that hit happens. So they're not happening at the same time, but because they're faded in and out, it just makes it really smooth. So works really effectively. And wait, there are more rim effects. So let's take off all the plugins. So that's a reversed rim hit, simple as that. It sounds like there's some modulation, and it's very possible I might have tracked some of the rim shots through effects pedals, because that sounds like it's got some chorusing going on. That wouldn't surprise me. But there's some automation. So the first thing is, for instance, we've got this low pass filter. That goes into a delay. It's this MEC DSP delay, which is great. And it's just like a tape delay kind of thing. Some EQ, taking out the lows. A nice big reverb. And then another EQ, just finally cleaning up more of the low end of the low mids. So that's that effect. And then I have, for instance, like these trailer effects that I made years ago for some like movie trailer stuff. So that gets used as a transitional effect also. It's fun. Okay, so now we're finally out of that. let's talk about more Rimshots. I know, it's the name of the track. Okay, so this is the first bit of bass, and it's like I was saying before with like, first it's like turning the snares on and off on the snare drum. With the snares off, I use that to make this. Let's take all the EQs off, and there are 3, and it's a little bit silly, but I think I just did that just because it was easier to look at. So without any EQ, the first EQ. So that's going to roll off the high end, take out some of the mid-range. Then there's another. More mid-range. And then a third, and this is just acting as a high-pass filter, mainly because then there's also this sub underneath it. So that's just making it so that they don't conflict in any way. This is the sub. Really simple. It's just a sine wave, almost like an 808 kind of thing. Came out of a machine drum, but you layer it with this, the Rimshots. And the other thing to note is that on this sine wave, it's faded in. So this would have been the hit right here. But because the kick happens, I don't want that kick to hit with this. So let's solo the kick. Here's our kick. And also, I did the same thing on this kick too. You can see right here, I faded in the attack of that machine drum kick because I didn't want that to also hit at the same time as the attack of the main kick. So by doing this, I avoid any kind of like clicky or flamming or phase issues. And I mean, you can see like the phase of the kick is obviously not perfect. I mean, I might have even flipped. Yeah, okay. I did flip the phase of the kick in the EQ because looking at it, you can see that they're near, like basically opposite, completely out of phase. So, I mean, actually here, this is, if we put the kicks in their native form, sounds like this, but with it. So, yeah, that matters. But let's go back to the sub right here. So for instance, if I had these things hitting all at the same time, it actually doesn't sound terrible, but I just put a fade in like that. So every time the kick hits, it would just get faded automatically. It should be a bit cleaner. So that's what's going on there. And I mean, that really happens for everything. I mean, it's like there is no moving bass line here. It's just sub hits, with the one exception of the FM bass. And these are all made on the modular. And these are just like bonks and, or, you know, as the Brits say, you know, you put a bang and donk on it. So it's a donk, a bang and donk. But these were, yeah, these were made on the modular. And you can see also, this is the swing I have. So otherwise, if it were a straight 16ths, it would have been, you know, right here on the grid. But it's not, and it's swung by 40 ticks. And 40 ticks is, for those of you who use Logic, 40 ticks is roughly pretty close to Logic Swing C. And when I used Logic 15 years ago, I really liked Logic Swing C. So once I discovered that it was a 40 tick swing, I just started often shifting things by 40 ticks in here. And then Pro Tools actually have, it has a, oh look, yeah, see, quantized grid. And I had Logic Swing C already selected, and they've got all these other swings too, like, you know, Cubase and MPC and Feel Inject or whatever the hell that is. So everything's swung here by 40 ticks. But let's go to the other FM basses. So I believe this track's in G. So I mean, and if I'm mistaken, I'm mistaken. But so pretty much everything, like almost every note you hear so far has been a G. But just to make this, you know, a little bit more evil and discordant, that bass hit, it goes G, G, F sharp. which I guess would be like harmonic minor, since this track is definitely in a minor key. But we've got another FM hit here, and that's more of like just a sine wave with like a pop, and that gets layered sometimes with this mouth tom, which is me going, but it's fed through a waves doubler and through some reverb, and then I just took out the low end because without it, I mean, it's cool, but I also have this providing low end. So those two things layer together, and then I have all that other sub stuff. So those are the FM basses, and then there's just like a little fill over here. And that's obviously not an FM bass, that's just some warpy re stuff. And that is also doing something interesting harmonically, where it's basically going from the fifth to the tritone. So since this is in G, that's it's going to be a D, and it's going from like a D to a C sharp, which would be the tritone of G. So you factor in, you know, the major 7 plus the flat 5, or raised 4, if you will, but it's really a flat 5. It gives this kind of like a menacing tonality to all of the basses, and those all get bussed together to this FM bass bus, and there's just a high pass filter on that, just to clean out that sub, because we have the other subs kind of taking the room of everything. So if we just let's solo all this stuff, and we'll layer that with the sub. This is basically how, and let's add the kick back too. And the FM bass hits are kind of, you know, they're organized so that they're dancing around downbeats and adding basically like some kind of rhythmic interest to everything. So that's the FM bass. And eventually, right from the beginning, we're actually introduced to this synth motif, and it sounds like this. And that was made on the Moog over there, but it's also fed through a bunch of pedals, and because you can see like there is, you know, it's very heavily affected, but the only plugins on the channel are this filter, which gets automated, and then just a compressor for sidechain compression. So really, this is all baked in there, and it would have been the Moog into an Eventide time factor, probably doing like a ping pong or just a stereo delay, and then into an Eventide space using a black hole algorithm. But that is what's creating this whole atmospheric synth. And it gets used in little fills too. And really nice long trails on the delay. Sounds really nice. And they're just two variations of it. That's the version of it that is used in the beginning. In the breakdown, we get a similar thing, but this time the filter is going to open up. And the nice thing is too, you can hear like there's some crackle in it, there's some noise. I think that's awesome. It's not perfect, and plugins don't have that. And I love those little bits of noise and those little bits of crackle, because that just gives it like a organic quality to it. But the synth is just me playing the filter, just manually turning it open. And that's that. All the synths, I mean, they're like variations of this, as you can see, but nothing really. It's just different. It's on different tracks just to kind of like make my life a little bit easier to look at, with the one exception of this at the very end, and this is processed differently. And this is kind of the outro of the track, if you will. And it's just very, very low passed, as you can see there. And there's a bit of multiband compression going on. Some EQ from the Slate API. And then I'm using this Brainworks master desk. And really, I'm blowing out the stereo width as far as it'll go, but then I'm using the mono maker to also mono anything under 189. And then that goes into a black hole, which it gets automated. So that's what it is. At the very end, I'm using the reverb to kind of like create this fill, so it just washes totally away. And that's how the track ends. So that's it for those synths. There's this little pad that gets added periodically throughout the thing. It's this little like jumpy granular thing. So for instance, really like when the track is building to like its most peak moment, it's going to be kind of like that little Quanta pad, which was made, I think Audio Damage makes Quanta. I think I was just demoing it and I made that quick little thing and then I never bought it. But because I just didn't love it as much as I thought I might. I'm a sucker for granular plugins, clearly. But this is going to be dancing in the background. Without it. So it really adds quite a lot. You know, it's adding all this stuff in the mid-range because there's not a lot of, you know, actual like melodic mid-range in this track. So Quanta, or my Quanta pad, is, you know, fulfilling that need. And then the only other real element of this track are the strings. And the strings sound like this. And it's just the old flat six major to one minor progression, which I'm a sucker for. And let's just talk about how those sound the way they do, because without any of the processing, they sound like this. This is the instrument track. I just pulled this up so we could see it. And there is a little bit of some mod wheel action going on here that makes it, you know, makes it sound expressive. Because without it, whoopsie, just get rid of that. It's all the same. This gives it a little bit of a little bit more life, like the bower, the players, you know, as they bow, you know, there's more excitement as they go further. It's just more expression, which is important. But then there's this EQ, and I should say first, like the strings are this like 8-dio adagietto, and it's just like a Sordino ensemble patch, and I love Sordino strings. And this is just a good, simple ensemble, and I've had it for like years, and it's just, I'll use it as a catch-all sometimes just to kind of have a simple ensemble patch. But that goes into this EQ, and this is a pretty band-passed EQ. I mean, I'm cutting, you know, all the lows out and pretty much all the highs, and that makes it sound like this. So the strings are now really distant and almost lo-fi sounding, which is a sound I love on strings. And then that goes into old friend, the black hole. Big modulating reverb, and then there's one last EQ that cleans up the low end. So that really adds, you know, this especially like moody texture to everything. And that's, I love strings, but really adding that kind of chord progression on top of it really does shift the harmonic tonality of this and gives it more of a context aside from just, you know, just chaotic, spastic drum techno. So you put things all together. I'm just gonna use this section right here because this is when everything is like the most full on. And actually, the only other thing I'm gonna note here is this FM bass, because there's one note shift here and it actually changes the feeling of this whole section, which is so cool. Because typically, that is, you're getting that G right there. It is a G, right? No, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm totally wrong about this track actually. But on this, it's been a few years, sorry. But in this moment, now this is the G or whatever. This is, there's a bass change right here. And before the bass was kind of always structured on the 4. And now we're hitting you at the root, and there's like the FM blast. As opposed to. So now you can hear those are really accentuating the root note of the of those strings, and no, okay, this track's in C minor. Aha! So so a lot of the other stuff's actually in F. But anyway, so that's my mistake. But I just really I do a lot of tracks in G, and my kicks are often in G, so that's why. But no, this track's totally in C minor. So apologies to the music nerds, and for those of you who don't care, great, I didn't mess it up. So that is entirely how Rimshot is put together. It really is structured entirely around this, you know, just percussive onslaught and banging the snare in a bunch of different ways, and then trying to, you know, concoct some kind of composition out of just playing a snare. I'm not like a drummer by any means. I can hit things and I can, you know, kind of keep a simple beat if I'm at a kit, but like very simple. I'm no Danny Carey by any means. But this is just a way for me to get expressive, and I love playing things live. And a big part of this album was trying to play as many things live as possible. So Rimshot is really based on like, let's hit the snare a bunch of different ways, let's record it a bunch of different ways, and then we'll just kind of arrange it and see what happens. And then started playing with the Moog, made this little thing, and but yeah, there's no guitars or anything like that. This is like everything else is synthesized with the exception of the snare, and then the snare takes, you know, half the track. So that's how Rimshot was made, and I would encourage you, if you're able to get your hands on some drums or, you know, whatever, drumsticks, even like drumsticks, and like I've got a mug here, you know, like that's fun. So record things. Really, like it makes things unique. It sounds so good, like even much better than like any kind of splice loop or something, because there's a life to it and it's yours. So you always just have this like personal connection to it too. So go record things and make weird stuff, and it's awesome. And until the next Deconstruction, I'll see you then.